coming out tonight. It's 6:30, or within a few seconds of that anyhow, so we'll get started here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brad Kay. I'm the city manager. For those of you that know, it's still Brad Kay, city manager of the city of Midland. We are going to, for those of you, there's a couple of faces in the crowd, I think, that were here last week. We appreciate you coming back. You're going to see a little bit different format this evening. We've got the room set up a little bit differently as well. Around the center table, what you have, just so that you're aware of, in addition to the Metrics team that is here, a number of department heads are here as well that are going to act as resources for you tonight. The rest, we pushed everybody to the outside tables here, and you are the ones that were really here to listen to tonight, get your feedback and input from, and we're looking to give you an opportunity to either share advice, information, requests, whatever you might have for us this evening once the presentation is complete. The main speakers tonight, however, is not going to be the city. We actually started this process off a little while back, looking forward and looking at what we need to do, looking into the future for our budgets, and so you're going to see some of the issues and the reasons why that's important for us. And we brought in the Metrics team to do that, so they're going to be our main presenters. A couple logistics, however, before we get to some of that. For the restrooms, so if you do need them, out the door to your immediate left, for both men's and women's restrooms that are out there. Other than that, Bob, you going to be okay taking questions when you get up, or do you want to kind of go through and run through your presentations?
I think it'll segue in pretty nicely. But if something comes up, we'll always, we like to listen.
All right, so you heard that. So the intent, though, is to be kind of informal. We get through, and it's really supposed to be an interactive night, and that's what we're hoping for from everyone. That being said, we are going to set the table a little bit in terms of how we specifically got here, how we brought the Metrics team in tonight, and why the city is going through this particular process. For that purpose, I'm going to bring up Dave Keenan. Dave is our Assistant City Manager. He's also our Director of Finance, which makes him an appropriate person to talk a little bit about some of our budgeting reasons for this process going on. So he's going to talk very quickly, and then we'll turn it over to the Metrics team. So, are there any questions before we get going and Dave starts? Awesome. I like to answer questions. That's good. So, Dave, I'm going to Dave Keenan, turn it over to him at this point.
So there's one area that we need to minimize the interaction. The restrooms are for one person, so when you go in, please lock the door. Just heads up. So 2 years ago, City Council approved goals for staff to go through the budget process. And we were actually able to do pretty well every single one of them, except engage the citizens to determine service and budget priorities. That was also the time we went through the flood, and we were looking for city managers, so we got a little bit behind on stuff. So we took that priority and made it a priority again this year, and we are here tonight to help get a thumbs up on that. So why are we here? So council basically directed us through this process. You're going to see some numbers that are going to kind of illustrate why we're looking 3 years, 5 years down the road, and deciding we need to start thinking about that and doing some things now. So they said go out and put together an engagement process. So we did. We went out and got competitive bidding, and the folks that are here tonight are the ones that came out, the winners, so to speak. And Bob Kittle is over here. I'm going to let him introduce everybody else. There were two components to this, actually. There was the survey that some of you might have taken, and our survey extraordinaire is actually here hiding someplace. We'll bring him out later on. He's sitting over here in case there's questions. And then, of course, Metrics takes the survey data, all the interactive data, and is going to put it together for a report for us that we can share with council, so that when we enter the budget process in January, we're armed with all this information. That pretty much gets me through this. There's not much else to say. You've got all the background information, the backstory, so I'm going to turn it over to Bob, give you the clicker. You're welcome.
I appreciate everybody coming out this evening. Just from our standpoint, we have Katrina Powell, my team here, VP of Municipal Services, Amanda Benno, Brian D'Annunzio, and William Cobalt, or William from Cobalt is over here in the back. He actually performed the survey. We're not going to actually get into a lot of detail in the survey. That's posted online, so if you did want to rifle through that, if you're a data person and really into analytics, it's actually under the budget section on the city's website. But what we want to do is actually get into some just high-level survey information and kind of why we're here. To reiterate what David said, but why we're here is, and I commend the city staff and council because they're looking very proactively. Munetrix is actually a data analytics firm that does planning and forecasting and benchmarking and that sort of stuff. And the city's looking 3 and 5 years down the road, which a lot of communities don't do. So what we're talking about is there's some challenges for the budget. They're very concerned. They want the citizens to provide input on this and help shape the direction, and I commend the city for that. It started off with just a survey. There were 2,000 surveys sent out, which created an opportunity for us to get statistical relevance. Many of you may have received them, 2 and 3 copies if you didn't get the first one in. You know, they didn't mean to pester you, but we ended up getting 559 responses, which from a statistical relevance standpoint was very solid, giving us plus or minus 4%. When really these sort of surveys are looking for a plus or minus 5% relevance, and that can, you only need 384 responses to get that out of a population size of 330. So the citizens of Midland did very well and were able to give us some information. There were also 303 that weren't in the control group that sent surveys in. You could got them online and that sort of thing. They weren't actually counted in the statistics, but the commentary and their information has been kept and summarized as well. Overall, the survey indicates the citizens of Midlands are very happy with the city and the services that are provided. So I put it, this is the ranking in order of how you feel. You know, it's safe and clean, and actually if I turn that sideways to make it a little bit easier to read, this is the way it's ranked. Now this is this slide and the next one, which is showing that there was a willingness to consider alternative funding options, ways to deliver the survey and so forth, which is shown on this chart. Now these 2 charts are in the handout that you have, but I'd like you to kind of hold off on those till the time being, because we're going to roll through that and explain what we want as part of the citizens engagement process. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then we want to sit and listen to you guys for an hour long or whatever it takes to get the information. But as you can see from the left side, you know, maintaining services with a small tax fee, you know, all the way to elimination of a service. And obviously that's a very low bar over there. But how did we get here? So just painting the broad stroke picture a little bit, the taxable value trends in the city have changed dramatically over time. Taxable value is what's used to generate the revenue for the city to operate its function. And way back in what we call the happy days, you know, the city was up at $2.5 billion, and it's been a decline steady. It's holding firm at about $1.96 billion right now, but it's considerably less than it was, which generates considerably less tax revenue. Now the city has made a lot of adjustments to that, which we'll talk about, but there are limitations. You might remember voting on Proposal A in Headley back in 1994. It was a great law at the time, but just like many things, like our 401k saving plan, it never took into account, or our real estate investments, never took into account a market crash and adjustment like we had. So it's going to take, Proposal A says that you can only increase your taxable value from a city revenue standpoint by CPI or 5%, whichever is lower. Well, CPI has averaged like 1.74 over the last few years, and it's less than that for 10 years. So it'll take the city till about 2027 to get back to its high point. And that doesn't consider any other challenges, like what happens if a major employer left or something drastic for the community in that manner took place. So there's dark store legislation, big box store legislation, which is a huge problem that's being fought in the legislature and the Supreme Court right now to try to protect the interests of local governments. And it also doesn't consider if somebody else moved in or new properties and investments and so forth came to be. The state funding hasn't kept up. You know, especially when Governor Schneider came into office, there was a huge deficit. The state readjusted its budget to deal with some issues, and the revenue sharing that was supposed to be passed down to local governments based on sales tax was used to balance the state budget, and it gapped open here in the last decade, last 8 years, to where the state has not been pushing revenue down to the cities like they once had. And the net impact of that from a 12-year period is almost $14 million of money that the state hasn't received, that Midland hasn't received from the state. And so they've done pretty well managing through that. And in fact, as they're in a pretty strong cash position today, this is a chart out of the metrics. We actually measure the fiscal well-being of local governments. There's a threshold for fund balance at 10%. And this is one of many categories that has a threshold to generate more or less a FICO score for a local government. The trigger's at 10%, and the city's running in almost 40% according to their 2018 budget. And the city's been able to hold the line on a lot of other key metrics. If you are in business or own your own business, or even how you manage your own personal finance. So the debt load that the city's had, the debt has been reducing, so as taxable value's been reducing, they've actually been holding the line relative to the trigger, so they've been staying far away from it. And as far as expenditures, from a taxable value standpoint, they've also been able to reduce expenditures as the taxable values come down to actually make it a little more sustainable. But things are going to change a little bit. So if I look at just their revenues over a historical period, I went back to the last decade, you can see that they're pretty flat right here. But when I look at the expense side continues to go up. And there's a lot of reasons that, and we all know. Healthcare, additional requirements for pension, just inflationary cost, fuel, maintenance of buildings. So when I start to add those together, you can see that we've gotten to a point where expenditures are starting to exceed the revenues. And what that does is start to create a negative fund balance situation. So if I look at this again, we're in 2018 right now. It's not a today issue, it's not a tomorrow issue, but the city is proactive enough to look far enough out to say, hey, we're not running the city for today or tomorrow, we've got to run it for the next generation as well. So when I put all that together, so this one picture shows me revenue, expenditures, and change in fund balance over a multi-year period. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up the database that we use for our analytics, and I'm going to show you a few things and how we actually get into this and try to find solutions. From that point, we're going to actually go through some of the highlights of the document and what we would hope to get your help with tonight from an engagement standpoint, and then move on from there. So let me just sit down at my little laptop here and do some screen switching. All right, so what we have, this is a landing page for the city of Midland, and what we have is we have...
You gotta switch your screens.
Okay. There we go. So this is a landing page for the city of Midland. We have every dollar in and every dollar out, doesn't matter what type of revenue, expense, and so forth. And we start to analyze it. This is that FICO-like score that I was talking about that has those indicator triggers. The most recent audit that the city has is 2017. There's going to be another one coming out in another month or two for their 2017-18 budget. But we have the projected actuals that are expected, the ones that were handed off to the auditors to do the finance, and their 19 budget. And you can see, green is good, red is bad. This is 98.6. If you were taking your temperature, this is send me to hospice over here. So when I start to project out, the city does a 2021 forecast, and some things that I'll show is that you're seeing the fund balance start to decline. And then what our algorithms did, we actually went in and extrapolated out what would 22 and 23 look like based on the current trajectory and the knowns and unknowns that we have today. And the city jumps up to a fiscal score of 5, which is 102 if you had a fever or something like that. But it does fall into a deficit situation on its fund balance. It's been able to manage a lot of the finances on a go-forward basis because it has money in other funds that can be used to fund things in general that would normally have their own revenue stream. So what we do in the system then is actually start to do a lot of different analysis, and I'm not going to walk all through the charts right now, but primarily we have a modeling tool that we can actually go in and start to do hypothetical what-if situations out into the future. So when I download the scenario builder here, what we get is an actual worksheet that looks something like this. So this is the baseline situation that the city's confronted with right now. And if I look at 2023, based on the projections that we did with our algorithms in the system, and using some historical, we do a linear regression on historical revenues, historical expenses, and we start to extrapolate these forward. This represents that 15% fund balance, negative fund balance in the general fund in 2023. So when I go into one of the scenarios, so I say, well, how much would it take to get out of this thing? And one of the big questions that gets asked is, what is an optimal fund balance to have? And this is an argument that you talk to 100 different communities, you're going to get 100 different answers, but there are some recommendations. Historically, the city in the last few years has been running in the 30s and low to mid and hits almost 40% after the 18 budget. But we kind of said, well, let's figure out what it would take to get to 15% first, or 20% fund balance from a minus 15%, so it's a 35% swing. The system uses the concept of $1 saved today or $1 spent today is the equivalent of $5 in 5 years. So we look at it from a compounding standpoint. So if I were to just put in a number right now, if I said $3 million, and if I plug that number in, you could see that it starts to change things on a go-forward basis. If I extrapolate that across, because that gives me a compounded savings, it takes the city up to a 12% fund balance. If I said, well, let's say that we can add another $1 million to that, and I go forward, I carry that line across, and that takes us up to 22.2%. So in reality, this is what, 4, 8, 12, 16, 17, 18, this is $19 million over a 5-year period that we have to save. So when we actually started to go in, what has the city done so far? So if I open up another tool here that I modeled some things in, just some cost that in talking with them, what do you have coming that's not necessarily in the budget that would be an addition? So this goes back to the original negative 15% fund balance. And through some work in the library system, and they have some bonds that fall off in 22 and 23 that aren't shown in the budget, as well as some incremental revenue, because you can't cut your way out of it. It has to be a revenue and an expense combination thing. So just with these savings, it takes it from the 15% to a 10.5%, 11%. So in the last workshop, there were 4 ideas that came out. We kind of did some rough estimates on that, and I actually modeled those into the situation as well. And that doesn't really amount to much. It only takes it from a minus 10.8 to 10.7. So you can see, and the extent of this is I'm trying to show the magnitude. It's a pretty big issue when you start looking at it over time. Again, it's not this budget year, next budget year, but as this compounds itself, it starts to actually get a little more serious. So what we're going to do is, and I can actually model hypothetical things into the system. I can carry it out to 2025 or 2030 and do what-if scenarios in the system. But we've narrowed this down. We want to look at it from a 5-year standpoint, and then it has to allow the city to be sustainable beyond 2023. Again, taking into account you're at, potentially at the whim of a major employer leaving, or if there was a major catastrophe or something like that, you have to have enough money in the bank to deal with it. So on your desks, on your tables, there's a Word document. And I'm just going to scroll through this really quick to kind of give you, I know some of you have been rifling through it, and I appreciate that. But a couple of key points that I want to make out. The first page gives a little bit of a history here as far as the Headley Amendment and so forth and so on. This is for you to take with you, but it kind of frames where we're going to from a community engagement standpoint here. It shows what the revenue is for this budget year and how it's actually broken out by the various types. You can see that 63% of the general fund revenue comes from property taxes, and interesting, 45%, almost half of the property taxes come from businesses, not residential properties. And 29% of that actually comes from the top largest businesses in the city. So we actually looked at the expenses going down. I left in here the same 2 slides from our PowerPoint I put in here. So as we get into the discussion, I want you to be able to look back at these things and see what it was that the survey generated as results of what's acceptable or not acceptable. And then there's 3 charts that look like this, and what I want to do is I'm just going to explain the color scheme. So green means that the respondents to the survey said enhancing it with a small fee or maintaining it with a small fee is acceptable. So green means that the citizens were willing to help, at the till, if you will. Red is that they think you should just reduce the service level. The gold or yellow is to combine it with another agency or privatize it. So this gives you, and again, this is for reference as we go through the exercise. Interestingly enough, one here that you can see with a red, reduce the service level, is bike lanes and paths. Now the one thing that we have to keep in mind too is that we want to attract new people into the city, as well as we want to provide the services for the aging population like me. I'm 59 this year, so there are things that are important to me that are potentially not important to a younger person that we might want to be attracting, and vice versa. As we scroll through the rest of it, and again, this will be something that you can go through, I listed also previous actions that the city has taken. And as I mentioned earlier, the council and administration have been proactive. This isn't something, they're not asleep at the wheel, and they've gone and fixed a lot of structural things already in the city. So this is just a bullet point list of those. I'm not going to go through it. Again, this is a document for you to have. But as an added chart, and one of the benchmarks that we do is we actually compare the expenditures of the city against others. So in this case, I sorted it for the region, the Eastern Michigan region, which includes all the cities in Aranac, Bay, Clare, Gladwin, Gratiot, Huron, Isabella, Midland, Saginaw, St. Lake, and Tuscola. And this chart shows the red is the expenditures on a per capita basis for the city of Midland. The blue is the regional average. So this is compared to 29 cities. So it's a statistically relevant number, and it shows where the outliers are. So police is a little bit high as compared to the average. The fire department's considerably high. The parks and recs and culture is high. Utilities a tad high, and transfers out. And transfers out are explained in here a little bit later. That's money that's in the general fund budget that's being used to fund other services that don't have their own revenue stream. The pie chart subsequent to that breaks out the categories in the general fund expense. And this is the 2018-19. You can see that it's higher than the revenue stream. And what I show here is taking these pie chart categories, I actually put them in bullet form with a little bit of definition behind them as far as what's included in that particular category. And during the discussion, Katrina's going to get up and explain the work group session. Everything's on the table. So we want you folks to look at every aspect of it and come up with some commentary that you think, as a user of services, as a property tax owner, so forth, business owner, what would you do if it were your business, kind of a discussion. From the first work group session, and this one's a little bit different because the majority of the meeting is going to be on you versus us talking up here. But there's some questions that came out is why are there 2 bus services and why are there 2 police patrols in the city and the county? Why do residents and non-residents pay the same fee for the use of things like the golf course and the library? Are the fees charged at the library enough to cover expenses, and why don't we increase cemetery plot fees? So those were the things that I used in that one estimate as we come forward, as we start to move forward. So I'm going to let Katrina talk about what we're hoping to do and how this is going to work with you folks, and then we're going to turn the table over to you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, you can.
All right, thank you. I'm Rob Schramm, by the way. What is the impact of the transitions out and the additional expenses of utilities? If those were more normalized or the transfers out were significantly minimized, what kind of impact would that have?
If you let me do the math while you're
Yeah.
in the work group session, I can give you that number.
Perfect, thank you.
And I have, just
Yes, sir.
because I'm a little bit new to all of this,
Okay.
but it sounds like when you put your $3 million in for one of the years and carried it on, and we're 40,000 people in this community.
Could you
That's-
speak louder?
Yeah, you know what, you put $3 million in for one of the years and then 4, and you carried it on, and that solved your problem. We're 40,000 people, that's $100 per capita. And you can look at your little chart, you know, there. So are we talking about trying to save money, or are we going to talk about where we want to find an extra $100 per capita?
Both.
We want your ideas
Creative
and feedback and comments and things that maybe haven't thought of. So it's all on the table.
And if the housing values hadn't dropped from where they were in, say, 2007 and continued, would you have a problem?
Yes,
You'd still have a problem.
yeah. That's about $2 million a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so at your tables, in your worksheets, at the very back, there are tables here. So what we are looking for, based on the information from the presentation that Bob just did, the information that's in this packet, and as well as ideas that are going to come out from the table, we want you guys to figure out, give us suggestions on how things might be funded moving forward, or funded differently. The goal of this exercise is to find structural savings. So, meaning that $1 saved or spent is $5 in 5 years. So, if you could, at your tables, choose one spokesperson to be the scribe. You're going to talk amongst yourselves for 30 minutes about everything, primarily focusing on the categories that are listed on how the money is spent, with your capital, utilities, public works, recreation, your transfers out, police and fire, everything's on the table. At the end of 30 minutes, we want the scribe from the table to report to us what you came up with and your ideas. Again, everything is on the table. We want your ideas. Nothing sounds crazy. Everything sounds like what we want to hear. So what we want to do is we want to know whether you want to maintain it with a small tax or a fee increase. If you want to enhance or improve it with a small tax or fee increase. If you want to combine it with other governments. If you want to provide some services and everything should be kept the same. Or if the fees should be decreased and we want to reduce the services. Or do you want to eliminate services to keep the taxes low? All of these things are things to think about. So you have 30 minutes. Have fun. At the end of that, we're going to ask for feedback from you.
If I may interject one thing into that. So yeah, it's revenue and expense. It's not, and it might even be, a new investment in the community. What sorts of investments might generate more tax revenue? New housing complexes, what have you. The list that you see here is actually exactly that blue bar chart that showed, and ranked in exactly the order. So it's just here for reference again too. And then the tables are set up, just identify next to where it says service area, if it's, parks or whatever, so we know what it is. And then ideas, funding alternatives, any other comments. And then what we're going to do is collect all these things at the end.
And we're also going to walk around the room as well and listen in at your tables and answer any questions that you may have or help you.
There's no silver bullet here, and it's just collective intelligence is better than somebody sitting in front of you saying this is how it's going to be.
All right. Okay, so we're going to get started. You guys ready? Now keep in mind this is informal. It doesn't have to be formal, but we do want your input. So we're going to start with table number 5. So what did you guys come up with for savings ideas? Who's your scribe? Of course, Jennifer's the scribe.
So what we talked about, we didn't, I guess, savings, it was more based on what we can do to increase revenue. And one of the things that we learned was that actually Midland hasn't levied anything, and they haven't asked for an increase in millage. So we think that an important part of moving forward is community ownership and asking citizens, to be willing to pay for the services that we have. And that kind of ties into being able to message to people in ways that they can understand. So for $3 more a month, this is what you're paying for. So that people can get a simplified understanding of what's going on and to build community goodwill. We discussed and agreed that the less privatization, the better. When you're taking money from people who are living and working in your community and spending that money in your community and paying it to out-of-town or even out-of-state companies, you're actually robbing your own community of the tax dollars and also of good jobs that support strong communities. So there was absolute opposition to any type of privatization moving forward. A suggestion was that we break out some of the popular items that people do like recycling, those type of things, break them out and ask for a millage to help fund those things. I think it will be really difficult to take a service that people are used to and then remove it and also keep your community happy. So we think that it's important if we take the items that people really thought were important to them and ask for funding for those, that would be a good idea. Prioritizing the road work so that it's staggered so we don't have angry citizens kind of blocked up all over the place. And also with regard to the capital improvements, tying those to community sentiment. So we talked a lot about the bike lanes, right? And it was interesting to me that the biggest area where people were like, oh, we can cut that out is bike lanes. But if you are going to city council or planning meetings, that is actually something that they're looking at increasing tremendously. So if you're not hearing the will of the people and the feedback of the community, we think that that's an area that needs to be looked at if you're asking people to contribute to the community. And so in summary, it really was a discussion about actually community ownership and forming goodwill in the community and asking, I think everybody agreed it was reasonable that these expenses are going up. The thought that we can't ask for more money from our community or levy anything, but also maintain this quality of life, it's not sustainable. And it doesn't have to be about politics, it just really has to be about community and what we're willing to give back for the community that gives a lot to the citizens. So.
Great job. Did you get it all, you guys? That's a great job. Okay, so table number 3. Let's hear from you.
You're the writer, you
Rob.
I really didn't, vote for myself on this one. So we had a lot of good discussions. We looked at it more from a perspective. We talked about the bike lanes and all the construction on the roads as well. Except that is an interesting activity. But we looked at it more from a funding opportunity, right? So we didn't know where to classify this. We called it utilities, even though we don't think it falls under this. But we think there might be a small opportunity, and maybe it's already being done, to look at more LED lighting type activity versus the street lighting I think we typically have. But maybe that's already been done, I don't know. I know that the old street lights are pretty expensive to run, and the new LEDs last longer and considerably more efficient.
Wattage, yeah.
Yeah. And then we also thought there might be an alternate income opportunity for us, because there are people like Grand Rapids and Kalamazoo, other places are putting in these big solar parks. And so the city gets the advantage of renewable energy, gets a tax credit, and I think that there might be some offsetting revenue that comes from that park, as well as there's companies out there that look for communities that do that, because they want power from renewables to run their operation, right? They don't want to come off the normal grid. They want a renewable source, period. And that's a big thing happening actually in Grand Rapids. We also noted, because we have children that are of that age looking for places to go and have fun and buy a new home, etc. And most people really like Midland because of the police, the fire department, the schools. It's a safe place to raise a family. But when they're younger, there's no place for them to go from an entertainment perspective. And so if there's a way that we can increase the interesting entertainment options in Midland, we think that that might be a good draw and increase people coming into the city or expend, what they're spending in the city. The other thing we talked about is the reduction like in the mall area where we've lost Sears, we've lost JCPenney's, we've lost Marshalls or whatever that other one is. What is it? Yeah, Yonkers. If there's
That's
something
happening across the country.
yeah, and that's happening across the country, but is there an opportunity, because we've also lost Best Buys, we lost Bed Bath and Body, or Bed Bath and Beyond, and a couple of other ones, and that's because those companies are being asked, or owners are being asked to pay a lot more rent, and they're leaving and going to another community where the rent's less. So is there an opportunity with the city with any additional space or utilization of other resources to offer a business a cheaper rent to bring them in and get that income from it. We think maybe under a general funds perspective, we've got one of the big draws is obviously our parks, recreation, the Center for the Arts, etc., which is pretty high class. It's good stuff. There's got to be a way to increase the amount of events to draw people into the community pertaining to those areas. And like the new Whiting Forest, I don't know how we can generate, but I'm hearing a lot of good feedback from the changes that were made there. So what other revenue can we pull from that to allow people to go? I don't think it really costs that much today.
So are you thinking about charging fees or something to attend
Exactly, I'm
events,
sorry,
that
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
thing? Okay.
Good point. The other thing that came up, and I don't know because, hopefully there's no police in here.
Oh, there's the
There's a lot of other people that do this, I don't do this. So, but CCTV possibly for some of our red light runners, because I know in this city that we have a lot of people that yellow light maybe is a little bit longer than it really is. And so maybe there's an option that you can use CCTV
Out of the state.
as a revenue.
It's illegal in the state.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, dang. I didn't know.
Yeah, it's illegal in the state.
All right, that's a bad idea, never mind. And so that's
Now
basically.
you can run all the lights that you want.
So that was really kind of the gist of our conversation at this point in time.
Great job. A lot of different ideas. So we're going to go back here to this back table. Table number 1, who's your scribe?
That's me.
Adam?
Thank you. So we were all over the place with what we discussed. A lot of our discussion focused on the fact that we just don't know what the impact of anything we suggest actually would do, right? If we say, so one of the ideas was, should there be a fee for the borrow a container? That's probably small change, but is it that small? So we have no idea, is that significant or not? And are there associated cost savings with things like, instead of allowing leaf litter and yard waste to be in paper bags, where the workers gotta get out, pick it up and lift it and throw it over, if it were just strictly in a hydraulic lift sort of bin where there was there was less risk of injury, does that impact any sort of insurance rates that the city has to pay? And again, we don't know. Let's see what else we got here.
Well, and there are some communities that allow the residents to rake it all up. I'm sorry, this is Public Works. That allow the leaves to be raked up into the right of way.
Yes,
and
we
they
have
come along
that.
with a truck and suck it up.
We have leaf
You have
pickup, and that's supposed to start when?
When the leaves fall.
I don't know if you've driven past any roads, but they're falling.
November 5th, we'll announce the end of this week, we'll start November 5th.
So, yeah, we have that already.
Oh, cool.
And we discussed that too.
That's a great service.
When it comes to adult recreation, a question about Curry Golf Course, would a modest increase in that fee be something the city would be willing to pay, or these residents would be willing to pay?
So I'm seeing nods from several different tables that they all had the same idea.
With the Loons tickets, could the city have a small surcharge on those Loons tickets? Maybe 50 cents, something on that order. It's not anything big, but it's a regular sort of event.
Their attendance keeps decreasing.
And that I don't know, right? And there are many communities that require bicycle registration, where you get a tag that registers your bicycle with local law enforcement, and then there's a potential revenue stream associated with that. Let's see. Special events, what sorts of fees are associated with special events that happen at the parks around the area? We got on the issue of streets, and rather than be too terribly bitter about things, what we feel like would be useful is better communication regarding the rationale for decisions as to when this street is being repaid and that street is not being repaid, and why the streets are progressing in the order they're progressing. That just generally better communication about why decisions are being made would probably go a long way to building goodwill in the community. And then there's one last one that I have to put on here, right? Because it was thrown out and it was potentially going to get shot down. In the library, is it reasonable to charge a small fee for electronic book checkout? That was the last little bit that we had. Not a terribly heated discussion, but sort of a wink and a nod type of thing. Did I miss anything that anybody wants?
Well, and actually, Matthew, I was just talking to your city engineer, and those streets are ranked based on their how quickly they need to, their condition and that sort of thing. There is a formula for doing that.
Yes.
You do pacer ratings as well as you have a pavement management
The notion is get that out so that everybody in the community knows that this is happening now and this is happening, and the reason why it's happening in this order.
Noted. Thank you. Table 2.
All right, well, the opening acts kind of covered just about everything that we wrote down here. So we also covered similar millage on local parks associated with where you're located. And we also mentioned a fee for large volume pickups from the city. So the last mark that we've got for community and economic development is perhaps a fee increase for building inspections. That I believe it's once every 3 years or so. So just a minor fee adjustment to increase revenue.
I think they're working on their
Yep, that fee that he specifically talked about on rental inspections is every 2 years, actually.
And I think
across the board, we are looking at those fees. They haven't been updated in like 20 years.
Oh, well, 20 years. Who needs an updated fee now?
And we actually put some of those into the earlier model, anticipating about 140,000 a year beginning next budget cycle too. So it could change, but that one was included in the earlier worksheet.
And last but certainly not least, table 4. William, I think you're the scribe. I know you were supposed to just sit here, but nobody at this table wanted to write.
Way to put them to work.
Okay. So we had a number of ideas. Initially, there was a lot of conversation regarding overlap of services, particularly law enforcement and transit. So that was something that there was a fair amount of concern expressed about. And so the opportunity there could be to either expand the amount of collaboration done between the two organizations so that it's not as redundant and reduce some costs that way, or working out some way of getting some funding back to the city because the city residents are paying for services that they don't really utilize. Another idea that came out of the discussion with transit is the possibility of privatizing some of that done in the city to Uber or Lyft or some sort of mechanism like that. In the area of road renovation, there were some thoughts about curb work and that we do a lot of curb work. It seems to take a lot of resource and time to do that, and some of it looks like it might not be as critical as just simply getting some additional resurfacing done. And so the opportunity there would be some savings by not doing as much of the curb work itself to free up some of the funds for other purposes, including resurfacing. We also talked about reducing or eliminating tree service and letting that be something taken care of by residents. We also talked about implementing a small charge for dumpsters. In the area of parks, potentially reducing the number of parks to free some of the funds to focus on other things to attract residents or visitors in. And then that park land can be used for lots of different things, either public or it could be sold off and put on the tax rolls. And the golf course came up as far as really eliminating the subsidy or even going as far as to privatize the golf course. And then on the revenue side, a couple of things. We talked about the refund of some of the county fees that are paid by coming back to the city. We talked about charging higher fees and various services for non-residents and tiering that out. We talked about potentially looking at the zoning and are there opportunities to rezone in a way that would provide some higher revenues. And looking at some of the old buildings in town that are vacant, a way of repurposing them or getting some sort of occupancy or tearing them down so that they could be utilized in a way that would produce more tax revenue. And also in revenue, just simply growing the population would increase the revenue. Anything I missed?
Great job, everybody. So, are there any other ideas? Yes, sir.
Well, listening to some of these, what do we, does Midland, you know, what Midland charges as a hotel occupancy tax compare with other communities? Because that might be a way to get some extra revenue.
The Visitor Convention Bureau charges that tax. It doesn't come into the city's revenues at all.
And there's no way you could, because I know when I travel, I will often see one that shows up as a municipal tax.
At the city and local taxes.
And we can't do that, is what you're saying.
I'm not sure. We'll put it on the list and look into it. I don't know off the top of my head.
Great idea. Any other? Yes, sir?
So my thought is, I'm listening to everybody here, and there's a lot of great ideas on how to cut costs and find different ways to increase taxes. It's not really revenue, it's taxes. And you're putting a lot of emphasis on the people who live here. And there's, I'm looking at this as 45% of the property tax revenue is coming from businesses. And coming from Sida to Midland, I've noticed a couple of things. It's very difficult for a business owner to establish a new business here in Midland because they have to go through zoning, and it's very difficult. I know a company in Bay City, they were trying to expand, they're trying to relocate and expand to Midland, and they went through so many hoops and got pushed out by Midland, and they lost the business. You know, the revenue taxes we lost, they ended up expanding to Frankenmuth instead. And they employ over 150 people now that live in Frankenmuth, that moved there. And we lost that. And just recently, there was another issue. There's a new business that's trying to establish here in Midland, brand new, building up a building right now. And they're going through inspections and zoning, and they had a hard time getting a drive-through window. And if they didn't have a drive-through window, that business is probably going to last 1 to 3 years. But it's very difficult. If we're trying to increase taxes and revenue, why make it more difficult to have businesses come in and attract new people to come to live here? You know, it should be the other way around. We should be trying to find a way to increase businesses by relocating here, to increase our revenue that way. Because all you're doing is you can cut, but eventually you're going to get to a point where people are going, okay, I can just move to Saginaw or Bay City or go north. You know, so you got to figure out how to expand and get bigger to offset that cost. That's just my input. It's hard to keep looking at this in that different way, and I have pretty close experiences with those two, and I've noticed that it's very difficult. And it's really strange moving to Midland too, by the way, is if you're a dentist office, there's a certain spot where you have to go. And if you're a restaurant, there's a certain spot you go. You know, it's very odd to me coming from the city, different area. But, I live a block away from like 6 dentists. They're all located right in the same road. If you live in Midland, you probably know where I live.
Party at Tom's house. Any other great ideas? These are all great.
Can I address a few of them?
Sure.
If I may, I don't think we need this, but, hey, after November 6th, we could start growing a lot of pot in this town. Likelihood it's gonna get approved. A couple of things that you point, all great stuff, and this is, there's no right or wrong answer. I used to work with one city manager, for him. I've been a city councilman for 18 years too, but, and he used to say, we can grow our way out of this. Well, you can't. People say you can cut your way out of it. Well, you can't. It takes a combination of different things that you have to take into consideration. One of the ideas that came out was privatizing the golf course, and if I'm not mistaken, that's already done, right?
The operation of it, the city still owns it.
Right, but it,
Billy Casper essentially owns it for us.
right. There was one, the LED lighting. Have you guys taken on an LED strategy? Is that?
So all of our signalized intersections, so the stoplights and things like that, those have all gone to LED. And then as we install new lights, those get all installed as LED.
For the streetlights?
For the streetlights, for the illumination. Consumers owns all of the lights, well, I won't say all of them, the vast majority of them. There are some pockets that the city owns the street lighting, but the vast majority is owned by consumers. And so the fees and things like that to convert over to LED is an upfront cost that we've investigated, we've looked at, and so we continue to look at that.
But just bringing some of these out, there's a company now that'll actually come in and cover the entire capital cost of converting an LED. They get a small percentage of the savings to fund their investment. They get a larger percentage of the savings up front, which then starts to move further into your pocket. I mean, for a city like this, it's probably $75,000 to $100,000 a year, versus if you spent the capital yourself, the savings is probably more in the $200,000, on an annual basis. What we want to do eventually is to try to quantify some of these things. Just for grins, the idea of charging $3 a month. So now I don't know how many actual properties, but if you just take the number of residents, 42,096 is the 17 estimate, multiply it times 36, $3 times 12 months, would generate $1.5 million a year. If that was to carry forward, it would actually take the city out of the deficit as we start to compound the savings from the prior years and so forth. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. Do you charge an infant, $36 versus somebody that's 75 years old? But just to try to get a scope of what something like that would mean, people understand it's the equivalent of a cup of coffee a day or whatever. But I just threw that in there just for fun, just to see how it went through there. If I go through and we're able to quantify some of these things, there was an old saying, one of my mentors, if you need an elephant to fill a village, you don't have to go kill an elephant. You can kill a lot of squirrels and and still feed the village. You just got to have a lot of hunters. So as we start to go through these things, I love the fact that we're seeing not only ways to be more efficient or even environmentally friendly, looking at redevelopment, charging fees for events. It's good to hear a community have no holds barred as far as the conversation is concerned. I'll stop there. These are all things that we'll have to evaluate. We'll try to assign a number to it rather than just swagging them right now, so that we can see if we did some of these things, and there are other things that have to come up, and how would it change the landscape of the situation. I want to go, which that actually kind of concludes it. Want to talk about next steps?
So next steps, I think you have a slide on that.
I do. Let me go back to that. I thought I'd have a little bit of fun if you entertain me too, just to show you a scope of the system. But the next steps basically are
You gotta hit the display. There it is.
So this actually, it's supposed to be October 30th. We were going to do there was going to be a business community one yesterday that didn't happen. So this was actually going to be the third session. We have another one tentatively scheduled
October 30th.
For the 30th. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be compiling all this information and sharing it with the city staff so that we can start to get a flavor for options and which direction the wind's going there. And ultimately, what we're hoping to do is the budget process in Midland starts in the January, February timeframe. And the city's trying to get ahead of this so that they can start looking at what options and that sort of stuff. There's several public meetings during the budget process. They're very into the transparency aspect of what they're doing, and they're very concerned about what the residents think. So that kind of covers the material, but I just wanted to show one more small thing here, if I can, to just say that if I was in Munetrix and we were doing some modeling, and we typically do this, so we know that the city has in the neighborhood of $41 or $42 million in revenue predicted. So if I use the forecast builder and I wanted to actually come up with a target year, and I'm going to go to 2025, and I want to create a scenario where I create a fund balance of 35%, and we're kind of hovering on the 20 right now, but let's say I wanted to build that up to be able to fend off, you know, some big virus that might come down the road. And let's say we look at the revenue stream and we're going to start attracting some new businesses, but I know I'm limited by Prop A and Headley, but I'm going to aggressively go for $46 million and process a forecast into the system. What that does is actually starts to build this going out, and if I wanted a fund balance of that amount going out into the year 2025, and I expect my revenues to be $46 million in that time frame, this is how much revenue I would have to pick up, I'm looking at scenario A, in each of the preceding years, and this is all I could afford to spend in those years in order to achieve that level. So we do a lot of wargaming like that, and then we say, all right, so rather than budget processes where everybody rolls it up from the bottom, it really goes into you can only spend what you have, and if it cost you $5 million to deliver something last year, and you need to put $200,000 away, you know, for savings, you only get 4.8 in the year afterwards. And in order to do that, these folks have to understand what is it that the residents are willing to let go of or pay more for. So I applaud the city for doing this kind of activity, and it's kind of a rarity, and I think it just goes to speak for the leadership and the strength of the city council to be willing to take this kind of stuff on. Any closing remarks after?
Yeah, just briefly, it was mentioned already. Behind me. It was mentioned already by Bob, and I think Dave did as well, is that we're not in a crisis today. I think the last meeting that we had, we made comment that we're not about to not make payroll or any of those types of things, but we are looking at in advance. So we're looking 3 and 4 and 5 years down the line. And our purpose in going through this exercise is to at least identify the trends, the beliefs, sort of values of the community, so that as we look into these and we investigate these with a little bit more depth and with more numbers attached to them, that we can kind of plug it into these types of ideas, and as Bob said, we can see the trends as to where we're heading. So tonight was not intended necessarily, as we said, to plug a number to everything. It was really to solicit as much feedback as we could get. We appreciate you all taking the time to come out and spend it with us this evening, and we will be taking these back. We'll be looking at them. Some of them, I'll be honest, we're already working on, so that's good. We like the fact that you supported what we're already doing, even if you didn't know we're doing it. Some of them are new, and I don't know if we came to them, but we'll certainly look into them to see what they are. And then ultimately, Dave and his team in the finance department, all of these department heads that are here tonight, it's all their jobs to kind of take all of these ideas forward, see what works, what doesn't work, and then eventually present budget ideas to council so that they can look at them and make some tough decisions as they move forward. But again, from our perspective, we again appreciate the time that you've spent with us. Some of you spent 2 nights in the last 2 weeks with us. So thank you for coming back again tonight, for those of you that did that as well. Yeah, and Dave, we were talking, we had actually decided the 3rd session that Bob had mentioned there, we decided that we're not doing at this point in time because the ideas that we're getting, they need a little bit of time to dig into and do some research on before that would probably be a productive session. So that one won't happen, but just kind of keep an eye open. We will have other opportunities as we go along. If we are ever making decisions that are tough on some of these services, there will be opportunities for public input on those as they go forward too. They won't sort of all of a sudden show up in the middle of a budget meeting and Dave's gonna go, hey, we're eliminating trash collection, or we're eliminating leaf collection, or, you know what, the police department's getting cut in half, good luck, guys. That won't be the way that we operate. We'll have opportunity for discussion and input as we make all of those as they go forward. Anything else? So, that was it, Bob. I'll turn it back over to you, and again, from our perspective, staff.